Greetings and welcome to the Pampering Myself podcast, an advocacy for self-care. We'll laugh, we'll cry, and most importantly, we'll learn that you can't pour from an empty cup. You'll hear stories, interviews, and conversations which will empower you in living your best life. Greetings and welcome to another episode of Pampering Myself. Today I have a very special guest who's going to share her story on a very important topic, mental health. And I'm so very proud of her, my niece, Captain LaShanna Potts. Welcome, LaShanna.
Thank you for having me.
So what is mental health? Well, according to the mentalhealth.gov, mental health includes our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. It affects how we feel, how we think, and how we act. It also helps determine how we handle stress, relate to others, and make choices, therefore making it important in every aspect of our life, from adolescence to adulthood. So when we talk about mental health, it encompasses a variety of health-related issues, such as anxiety, depression, suicide, ADHD, that's attention deficit disorder, bipolar, eating disorders, obsessive compulsive disorders, schizophrenia, and a list of others, which means just about every one of us could fall into one or more of these categories. Now, there's some signs that we talk about when we know there's possibly some mental health issues, according again to the mentalhealth.gov website. And that's eating or sleeping too much or too little, pulling away from people, having low or no energy, feeling numb, feeling helpless or hopeless, feeling unusually confused, forgetful, on the edge, angry, upset, worried, or scared, yelling or fighting with family members, mood swings, persistent thoughts and memories you can't get out of your head, thinking of harming yourself or others, the ability to perform simple tasks like taking care of your kids or going to work or school, smoking, drinking, or using drugs. That is a long list of things. But there's a stigma why we don't want the help or seek the help. The public stigma is what the general population thinks about us. And the self-stigma is how we think about ourselves. So, LaShanna, before we get into your story, please share why it's so important for you to speak out on this topic, because not everyone is willing to be as open as you are, which research has shown is part of the problem. So who or what inspired you to share your story?
Wow. So I can probably go back to maybe 5 years ago. It was a very stressful time in my career. I was finishing up staff and command. I was on a promotional list to get promoted, and I had an anxiety attack, or at the time I thought it was a heart attack. And so, not knowing what that felt like, it took months and months and months for the doctors to recognize that that's exactly what was going on. And I felt that if I could get through that it was important for me to reach back and help someone else who may be suffering. So that's why I think I talk about it. I hadn't talked about my partner's death since 99. I started talking about it probably about 5 years ago, and I thought that if I could share my story, that other officers who may be experiencing what I was experiencing would seek help.
Okay, so you were interviewed about 3 weeks ago in the Detroit News, and this was regarding the increasing number of suicide attempts within the police department across the state. So we're certainly glad this topic is finally getting some national attention. And the article talked about that sting operation that you just mentioned with your partner in 1999, where you witnessed him being gunned down. And that's when I believe the emotional trauma started. Now, we know firemen, police, and military personnel know the risks involved when they sign up for the job, but nonetheless, it doesn't ease the stress. Personally, I believe there's a difference in knowing what could happen and how one responds when it happens, especially when you're faced with violence and trauma on a daily basis. So, going back to that incident in 1999, what do you think you could have done differently or wish was available to you at the time to minimize the emotional trauma and thoughts of suicide that you experienced? Or do you think anything could have been done?
So I'll go a little bit before February 5th, 1999. I actually came on the job February 17th of 97. My first incident where I witnessed something violent was 6 months out the academy. I got a police run. I was working with the sergeant at the time, and we got a domestic violence run. And we got it in a Polish neighborhood in the 11th precinct. And I can remember vividly going up to the house and hearing a bunch of yelling going on. And it was one of those houses where there was a framed in porch, and the porch lock was locked. But you can see through from the porch into the front living room. And there was a son there with his older elderly mother, and he had her by her neck. And we were telling him to let her go, let her go. And he was yelling, but he was yelling in Polish, and none of us at the time spoke, Polish. And when we finally got the lock open, we saw that he had reached back, stabbed her with a butcher knife, and went through her neck and out her mouth. And he dropped her. And when he did that, our guns were raised, and they had to take us, the sergeant who was there, to tell us don't shoot, because at that time he was unarmed. I think that was the first kind of stone that went into my bucket when I came on the job. The department at the time didn't have a debriefing. There was no counseling for us. It was more like, okay, you saw it, we talked about it for a second, and then we went back on patrol. Fast forward, I was transferred over to vice enforcement, not even thinking about this incident anymore. And on February 5th, 1999, we did a operation at Shane and Hendry. It was an area that we had not worked before. We didn't have any intel in this area. We had a new supervisor at the time who picked the area, which was different than what we have done numerous times before. We felt a little uncomfortable about going out, but we did it anyway. I was the first decoy out on the street. A Bronco pulls up. I engage him in conversation. He offers me money for sex. I signal for the takedown crew, which was manned by Officer D.S. Graves and Officer Richard Scalf. We had did this hundreds of times before. At that time, vice enforcement officers, we did not wear, the female decoys didn't wear vests, and we did not have our firearms on us, because a lot of times the guys will come and kind of search you down to make sure you're not a cop. I started walking back to the UC that was parked across the street. I remember my partners telling them, to get out the car. They got out the car. And as I'm walking back, I hear several gunshots. My brain didn't compute that this guy was shooting at these officers, because at that time, this was a misdemeanor ticket. This wasn't something that was going to lend him, life in jail. He wasn't going to go to prison forever. And it just didn't seem that it was real. After I figured that my partners were shot, it's like reality set in. And that day I watched my partner take his last breath. Again, the department didn't have anything in place like peer support. Thank God they have it now. But back during that time, it was you drank after work, you say RIP, rest in peace. We said some good memories, and then we were back to work. And I think if the department had handled that situation like we do now with critical incidents, I would have never went into the depression that I went into.
I can only imagine. You spoke of just a few, but I'm sure there are lots of stories either by you, other officers, for the years that they have endured, the trauma, and seen and witnessed those things. I've never seen anything that traumatic, but I can only imagine how it is. But I have a question. Do you believe that was the beginning, or was that just the tipping point of all your health issues? And I ask that question because it's usually a buildup of problems or things we haven't dealt with emotionally.
So I've never had that asked to me before. But if I can be just candid and honest. That probably was the tipping point for me. Um, I grew up single parent household. My father died when we were very young. My mother did the best she could, but she made some mistakes along the way. There were some things that happened in our childhood, I believe, that lend themselves for me to experience trauma, not only as a child, but then again, revisiting it when I got to the department. So if I had to answer, I would say that this was the tipping point. Some things that occurred in my childhood that didn't allow for me to learn how to process anger, hurt, resentment, things that I can think of now. I probably suffered from anxiety then, and just didn't know what it was. So I would have to say that overall, I think childhood trauma plays an impact on adulthood trauma, and I definitely believe my childhood played into what happened after this incident.
Now, I agree with you as well. And I'm sure some of these people, like, for example, the guy who stabbed the lady in her neck, uh, have some mental issues. I remember years ago when people used to say that they got off for committing these crimes because they plead crazy or insanity. And they are. You have to be insane to do certain things like that. So I believe they are, and their issues probably go way back. What didn't happen or what did happen, which is the reason for them losing it, and they never got any help. They shut down all the mental institutions here in Michigan, and so these people have nowhere to go to get any help. Now, when we talk about mental issues, people are often in denial, mainly because it is a stigma, or they may not recognize that they even have a problem. Did you know something was wrong? Or perhaps were you in denial? Or did someone else have to point it out to you first?
So I was definitely in denial. Like I said, the culture at that time in policing was you buried your sorrow and your anger at the end of a bottle. And so for me, being around people who drank after a critical incident, it became my norm. It became how I dealt with a lot of my issues. I didn't understand how much I drank until I stopped drinking 5 years ago. So my mom actually, and I always credit her for seeking help for me. She noticed being in law enforcement for the time that she was in there that the way that I was dealing with the loss of my partner was not a healthy way. I would come home, literally drink, go to sleep, wake up, go to work, drink, go to sleep. And that was a routine. And at the time, I had a young daughter. And so my mother was taking on a lot of the responsibility of taking care of her because I was burying my sorrow at the bottom of a bottle. So, I always thank God for my mom recognizing the symptoms of depression. She did seek help from me, and she pressed the issue until help was received. And I look forward to the fact that I can speak on it now because I know that there's officers out there who's suffering just like I suffered, and they feel like they're the only people in the world going through the issue.
I know we talked about, and I read a list of symptoms, and you stated some of them that you experienced, which was the drinking, sleeping, but you got up and went to work every day, correct?
You had to,
Yes.
Because if you don't go to work, then you got the police in your business. So I made sure that I slept enough to sleep off the alcohol, um, and go to work and pretend like I'm the same bubbly, charismatic person that everybody expected me to be. I cracked the same jokes that I did, but when I got home and reality set in, I would pop another bottle.
Yes, and that would be a vicious cycle and continue on going. So I'm glad she was able to identify and you were receptive to it because sometimes people um, don't think they have a problem. They're in denial.
I wouldn't say I was receptive. I would say that she forced me.
Yeah, well then that's
to
good.
Seek help.
That's
Yeah.
good because at some point you did. But there's people that can't even be forced. They resort to the suicide, and that's why the suicide rate is so high. Either people don't recognize it in them, or they don't recognize it in themselves, or they do, and that goes to that self stigma. So, knowing what you've been through, does it help you identify trouble in other officers and your fellow officers? And if so, how do you handle it?
It's so funny. So I'm almost, people joke and say I'm one of the people who are empath. I'm a person that can walk into a room and seek out the person who may be hurting, who's not saying anything. And I just look. I tend to look at people in their eyes when I'm talking to them. I go by body language. And I'm oftentimes, I can be in a room, especially after a critical incident, and I can see that officer, and it's almost like a reflection of me back in 99. The person who's overly joyful, who's pretending that this really didn't phase them, those are the officers that I seek out. The ones who are crying, who are actually realizing the fact that they're in trauma, usually don't have the problem. It's those who pretend like cops don't get angry, they don't get hurt, they don't get sad. Those are the ones that I'm seeking to help, because those are the ones who are going to pretend like everything is going to okay. And when you ask them, they're going to say, "Oh, I'm good." And we know that in law enforcement, "I'm good" is probably the number one killer, as why officers commit suicide. Just looking statistically, we've had way more officers, over 270, who have committed suicide in 2019. That was double from the previous year. And I'm sure a lot of those officers face trauma, and when asked, they probably said they were good.
Now, you're right, because actually, even when you talk about trauma, people who are hurting inside, I've recognized that in some people who are going through whatever it is they're going through, whether it's a divorce or something, or loss of a loved one, they have a tendency of, like you said, trying to pretend I'm okay, but they're out of character with what they do. And you can even tell if they're on medications, their mood swings. So it's recognizable, although they think they're fooling people.
Absolutely.
But you can tell. So, what steps did you take, or the resources did you use to nurture yourself back to health?
Several. So, I went to a psychiatrist. I was prescribed anti-anxiety, anti-depression medication. However, I was one of those groups, and there's a small group of people who have an adverse effect to those medications. And so when I took those, they sent me in a deeper depression. They sent me in more anxiety. So I had to start looking holistically. What could I do to change what was going on with me? I reached out to a place called NeuroCore, and it's a place that teaches you to rethink negative thoughts. And when you go in there, they're basically brain mapping your brain, and they're doing things on a computer to see what triggers a response from you. And it took months of therapy for that. I also started doing massage therapy. I was doing that twice a week for months, and acupuncture. Just trying to do anything I could to reset my brain, get my stomach back in order, because at that time I had dropped so much weight because I wasn't eating. I had developed what they call leaky gut. The food wasn't staying down, and these are all the symptoms of being in a depressive state. And so once we got that under control, meditation, I started going to church, which I need to get back to, because once you start feeling good, you feel like you don't have to go back to
the
church.
World.
But just going to church every Sunday, being around family, having people pray for you, those were the things I think that were the turning point for me. The medication, and I'm not knocking it, because I think some people really do well on psychiatric medication. However, there are those like me who it worsened my condition. And so I would tell people to find out what works best for you, and then keep using and trying different things. And I always say to people, give it one more day, then one more day, then one more day. And eventually, that one more day will be the day that you see the rainbow at the end of the thunderstorm.
Well, it's ironic that you talked about it being all the things that were holistically helping you, because that's what pampering myself is all about, the meditation, the yoga, the things that help you holistically. And as you stated, some may need medication. But I do remember while you were going through this storm, how you looked at all the ingredients and the chemicals. I mean, you were really obsessive with it, but
True.
it was. I mean, we have to look at that,
Hmm.
the ingredients that that could affect the way you feel, the things that you use, the utilities that you use to cook in. When I was going to this one chiropractor, they were telling us about things that we did not want to cook in, the type of material that gets into your food. So, all that's important. You were researching all of that. So, that is what got you back to health.
It actually is. I wish I would have kept some of those things because it helped me to get back mentally and physically
Yes.
healthy. And once we start going away from that, my weight gain picked back up, my insomnia started back, my anxiety flares up, and it is what you eat. And so now I'm going back to the drawing board and starting to look at again, what am I putting in my body? You'd be shocked how many chemicals that are in food that play a role in your psyche.
Right.
And once we learn those things, what triggers it? What triggers anxiety? I don't drink anymore. I know that alcohol for me will never be something that I can indulge in. I can't have caffeine anymore. I know that caffeine for some people is great. For me, it is something that will send me over the edge. Chocolate. It's just so many things that are wrapped in different names. Sugar.
Oh my goodness.
Spicy food.
You know, I don't think that it's okay for people. I think they haven't gotten to a level where it has affected them, because those are known dangerous chemicals in caffeine and sugar by 100,000 names. But people are learning more as we talk about self care and to be able to help them. So others have credited you for changing the culture and the paradigm in community engagement. Do you feel it's making a difference? And if so, how?
I do believe that it's making a difference. I think as a whole, we could do better. I think with this chief that we have, he is really, really, really into community policing. And even before he came, that was just something that I believed in growing up in the city and interacting with police officers that I respected. Um, do I think I'm making a difference? Some days I feel like I'm making a big difference, and then other days I feel like not so much. I think that each person that I encounter, if I can show them something different than what they're used to when it comes to police officers, then maybe they can pass that experience on to someone else. A lot of times when I talk to children who have a negative view of police officers, it's because their parents were maybe locked up by one of us, or they've heard something in their family that the police officers did something to them, and then when they see me and I'm delivering gifts on Christmas, or I'm helping the mom buy groceries for the family, the children would often say, I didn't know there were good police officers. I know that when I grew up, you would go into a school and say, what do you want to be? And half the class would want to be in law enforcement.
Right.
You go now and you may get one or two. And so I think it's an obligation for police officers like myself to change that shift. We can't expect people to want to be like us if we ourselves are not reaching out to the community in which we serve.
Right. I agree with you. Um, your precinct now has a new room, and it's called the Meditation and Serenity Room. Describe what that room, describe the room to us and tell us what's its purpose.
Oh, so this was a labor of love for me. I knew when I became a captain, anywhere, wherever they're going to put me, that I needed a space that officers can go to relax. Um, Even if it's for 5 to 10 minutes in between a run, a lot of times these officers are seeing the worst of humanity. And so it's a place for them to kind of just unwind. When you go into the room, there's a coffee bar. And I have to give special thanks to 411 Therapy, which is a sponsor that helped me kind of create this room. There's a coffee bar for officers to have a sip of coffee. We have tea, we have cocoa, and then there's 3 massage chairs where they can kind of unwind, take out their gun belt, and just kind of relax for that 5 to 10 minutes, either before their shift, after their shift, or in between runs. We also have a couch in there and a 500-gallon saltwater tank aquarium. And it's just something that I felt was important. I think that we don't realize the stress that officers are under. And a happy police officer is better for not only themselves, but also for the community.
Do you personally use that room?
So I have not yet. I'm one of those people that will do and say things, but not necessarily take in the advice that I'm throwing out. But I am going to make it a habit that I do use the room as well. I do encourage police officers to go in there, even the civilians that work in our precinct. And the response has been overwhelming. They really, truly appreciate having it in the space.
Now, I know for a fact that when you did the article for the Detroit News, that a lot of people reached out to you, um, congratulating you, number one, for sharing your story, but also that there were many people who thought that they or felt that they were in the same situation and did not know how to reach out. What was your response to them?
Oh wow, it was overwhelming. I had people that I respected in this career who reached out to me and told me that they had bouts of suicide thoughts. I had widows of officers who had been killed in the line of duty who felt that the depression that they were facing that no one understood. It was overwhelming. It's still overwhelming to get responses from people who you touch. Some that are not even in law enforcement that just read the story. I think it's important that we keep having this conversation because the reality is that we got people who are hurting. And unless some of us who've made it to the other side start talking about it, you're going to have a lot more people committing suicide. And if I can do my small part to prevent just even that one officer or even that one civilian who's thinking about it, who can remember my story and get some hope, because I think a lot of times suicide is based off of hopelessness. They think that tomorrow is never going to come, it's never going to get better. And if they can look at me, I wanted to commit suicide back in '99 as a young police officer, and now I'm a captain running a precinct in this department. And so if it can happen for me, I want them to believe that it can happen for them.
Absolutely, I agree with you 100% because there is hope, and that's the message that we want people to get out of this. Now, recognizing that stress plays a major part in our life, regardless of one's occupation, financial status, race, or sex, what steps are you personally taking to not only minimize your stress, but to relax so that this doesn't happen again?
So I now do massage therapy. I go twice a month. That is something that I will not navigate from. I also take my vacation. So I was a person that was a goal-oriented person. So a lot of times my vacations never happen. Trips that we wanted to go on to never happened. Family functions never happened. And so in 2020 especially, I said that I'm going to start really, really connecting back with family, friends, myself, my marriage to my husband, my children, and just really putting what's really important at the forefront. Don't get me wrong, I love my job. But when I retire from this job, I got to look at those same faces that are not from this job, and I don't want them to be like, "Who are you?"
Right.
So I'm making it a point to make family important, and do the things that I said I want to do. If I'm not learning anything else, today is not promised, and so all of those things that I keep pushing off, I don't even know if I'm gonna be able to do it because I don't know if I'm gonna wake up tomorrow. And so just live every day as if today is your last day, and try to touch every person you can and make their day better. You never know what that smile can do to someone who's struggling.
Absolutely, because we don't really know. We just know that people are hurting regardless of who they are or where they are, and something you say could help them or hurt them. Now, I know you have shared your story to the newly sworn police officers in the graduating class. What advice have you given them?
So, what I try to tell them is this department can prepare us to arrest people, they can prepare us to know our laws, they cannot prepare us for death. They cannot prepare us for the things that we're going to face in society. What I try to tell them is stay connected to their family. Don't become those officers who used to do this, who used to do that. I think we start getting wrapped so much into law enforcement that we forget about how important it is to have a family background, to have if you don't have a pastor, to get in someone's church. If you don't believe in religion, then find something higher than yourself that you believe in. Those are the things that center us when chaos is around us. And if young officers can continue to believe in that and continue to do the things that used to make them happy before they became law enforcement, they'll have a long, uneventful career. Because the reality is, and I tell them this, the trauma that you see today is going to be the trauma that you face tomorrow. And so if you learn how to cope, when you go through this year for 25 years, I'm on my 23rd year, and I've had 23 years of experiencing trauma on this job. When I leave here, I don't want those ghosts to be following me. And so I'm learning how to cope now so that I can retire and live a good life and do the things that I wanted to do in retirement. And so I just tell them to just keep God first, keep their family first, and make sure they spend time with those people that they love.
So when we talk about coping, what is the department now doing to help these officers cope?
So when Chief Craig got here, and I can't thank him enough, when he got here, we had so many officers being killed in the line of duty, and we had so much trauma that was going on. And I remember vividly, he looked around and he asked us, how do we seek help? And at that time, we didn't have a program for police officers. So he started the peer support program, and he specifically looked for officers like myself who experienced trauma either on the field or outside of this department. And he put a group together. And we've been building this plane in the air while we're flying it since 2015. And so this is a way that we've helped over 400 so officers have reached out and received help through us. We not only talk to them, we let them vent, we meet them wherever they are. We also provide them resources. If we can't handle the issue they're dealing with, then we refer them to someone who's better equipped to handle it. And I think we've saved some lives. Matter of fact, I know we have. And so I think the department is ahead of the curve when it comes to dealing with officers and emotional trauma. And I think that if we keep continuing down the path that we are, we will never have to say to a family, I wish we could have did something different. I think that officers are still going to be suicidal. The difference is they know that there's a number that they can call and that will pick up and will help.
So is it mandatory now that they seek some help after trauma, critical shooting, or are those words, I'm okay, still ringing out?
Those words, I'm okay, are still ringing out. The difference is we now go to now. So when there's a critical incident, we're automatically recalled. And we meet those officers at that scene, at the hospital. And so even when they don't want to talk to us, they're talking to us. And I think it's because we're in their face. A lot of us are those that they respect within the department. And they also know that we're not just saying we'll help, that we've actually been through the trauma that they're experiencing. And we're now learning or teaching them how to cope as we've had to learn how to cope. You're still going to have people who are not going to seek help. But you try to help those that you can when you can.
Right. Well, is there anything that you would like to say on behalf of either the Detroit Police or anyone out there dealing with any kind of mental health issues or anything, any closing remarks you'd like to say?
Well, first, thank you, Auntie, for having me. I don't know if it's proper to say Auntie.
Yes, it is.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
But I will say, when you see a police officer, thank a police officer.
Absolutely.
This is a thankless job. And a lot of times, officers don't feel the love from the public. And we know that the public cares. But there's a small minority who always are loudest in the room. And those are the ones who are saying anti-police rhetoric. I can't speak for all police officers, but I'll say the majority of them, they really, really want to give back and help the public. And if you can do anything it doesn't cost us anything to say thank you. It doesn't cost them anything, and this is to police officers. When you see a citizen wave, say hello, stop and ask them their name. I think if we just get back to the basics of just saying hello and being respectful to each other and treating each other with compassion and empathy, I think we can turn the tide in policing as well as in this community. So that's the message that I want to end with. Just treat each other like human beings. Treat them how you would want to be treated. Treat their family how you would want your family to be treated. And every day, make it a point to make someone's day better than it was.
Absolutely, because they have to go home to someone, and we definitely don't want them stressed out, making either bad decisions or choices. So, LaShawn, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for sharing your story, because that's part of the problem that we have, that people aren't transparent enough. So I really appreciate your transparency, and I'm sure that this will help someone.
Thank you.
And again, thank you for being open and honest.